What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel, and thank you guys for tuning in to another BC Lions preview video. Week number 4 is here already, nearing a month complete in the CFL season already. How the time flies when we are having fun, enjoying football back in our lives once again. That being said, we are in the thick of things, folks, getting into as I mentioned, the 4th week of the CFL season. Teams are starting to get hopefully a little bit more comfortable now, with the shorter preseasons, shorter off seasons. That's kind of the unfortunate side, I think, of some of maybe the earlier weeks in the CFL action of maybe some sloppier, not as crisp and clean play. I think now that we're starting to get into July here, now teams are going to start to find their rhythm and really start to, get full speed ahead here moving forward. And hopefully, as we are most people that are tuning in, I know will be some Rider fans that are tuning in as well, but hoping that the Lions are going to be hitting full speed ahead here in the next month, 6 weeks or so, heading into Labor Day with some momentum. So Labor Day still quite a ways away, folks. We're not even in July as of now. So we'll talk about Labor Day when the time comes. That being said, today's a week 4 preview. BC Lions taking on the Saskatchewan Roughriders, heading to Saskatchewan to take on those Riders. And we're going to be joined today by Riders reporter Britton Gray to be breaking all things down to the matchup. Of course, before Britton joins us, we're going to be giving you guys our initial thoughts. Britton will join us to chat a little bit. We'll break down the BC Lions offense versus the Riders defense, and then we'll go vice versa, BC Lions defense versus the Riders offense. We'll chat a little bit about the injury report because obviously there is a few names to be talked about, not just the one Nathan Rourke that is obviously the most important, or maybe the highly anticipated, most talked about status of Nathan Rourke. The Lions are going to be missing some other bodies. Dejon Allen looks to be missing this game, Jonah Devay as well. So we'll talk about the injury report, and then, of course, we'll give you guys our 3 keys, and we'll get out of here. But before we get into our week number 4 preview, guys, of course, if you guys could like the video, comment down below how you guys are feeling about this matchup this weekend. Personally, I love that the Saturday is a lone standalone game. I love the CFL is now returning to their Sunday slate of games when they, from here on out till the NFL season, starts. They play games one per day usually. I believe it's Canada Day might look a little bit. I know Canada Day is this weekend. I believe it's the Labor Day that's might be a little bit different. Other than that, we'll have a game Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, which I really enjoy having a game to watch every day during the weekend and Thursdays, of course. But of course, comment down below, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. When you guys subscribe, press the notification bell. You guys get notified every single time we go live or upload any sort of content here on the channel. We're up over 400 subscribers now, so we appreciate all you guys for subscribing. But still, 75% of you that are consuming our content remain unsubscribed. So if you guys can subscribe to the channel, that'd be greatly, greatly appreciated on our end. Other than that, folks, Saturday, 4 p.m. Pacific kickoff in Saskatchewan. The BC Lions tangle with the Saskatchewan Roughriders in a pretty big early season Western matchup in the division. Of course, the BC Lions could fall to not only 1-3 on the season, but 1-3 in the Western Division early on, which is not ideal. But getting kind of into my initial thoughts here before we bring in our guest. This is a big matchup, but this is the first of two times that we'll see the Riders in the next month of the season. We do close out the season in Saskatchewan as well, but play Saskatchewan this upcoming week. We go to Montreal, go to Edmonton, and then we host Saskatchewan once again. I know on the post-game show, if anybody was tuning in or if anybody went back and checked out the episode, which I highly encourage you guys do, there's some good stuff in there. I mentioned I think a very acceptable outcome is to split the next month of the season, split with Saskatchewan, go 2-2 over the next month, which would be, maybe you lose versus Montreal, lose versus Saskatchewan in Saskatchewan, and you make sure you take care of business in Edmonton versus the Elks and at home versus the Riders. obviously not ideal, and you're wanting to win as many games in every game as possible. But, the lines are going in, and it looks like to be another Jeremiah Masoli-led club, which no slight at Jeremiah. I think Jeremiah was okay last week. I thought he had some good moments. I just don't think he was good. I don't think he was bad. I think he was kind of right there in between. And is not Nathan Rourke. So when continuing to go down and looking at, I think, the obstacle that is going into Saskatchewan and trying to get a victory, the hostile environment. I know it's been chatted about a little bit in the last few years of kind of the rider attendance slipping and starting to not look like the old days, but still a very hostile environment up there. I think arguably outside of Winnipeg, you could argue that it's the best in the CFL outside of Winnipeg, as I mentioned. And when you look at the matchup, of course, on the field, the big question marks that are looming of obviously Nathan Rourke, who I would think is unexpected to play. I know he has been practicing this week in some limited capacity, but was a DNP once again today at practice. So I think it's probably something similar to what we saw last week, which would be him dressing in an emergency third string option and not being named the starter. And then, of course, over in Saskatchewan, Trevor Harris earlier in the week, DNP multiple times. And then today I know he was back at practice. So I think the status of both quarterbacks is something that to, kind of keep an eye on going into this game, and is obviously, with the quarterbacks getting the spotlight and the headlines, I think this game will be much better if, either or quarterback or, both of them is able to play. So something to keep an eye on. Of course, both teams being able to have two veteran quarterbacks, I think, is a nice thing to have. Jeremiah Masoli, obviously, on the BC Lions side, and then Jake Maier. I know CFL fans have a lot of different opinions on Jake Maier, but I think he's a quality backup and a CFL veteran with starting experience. So kind of breaking down my initial thoughts, folks, I think it is the moment to bring in our special guest here, Riders reporter, Britton Gray. Britton, let me actually make sure we can see Britton. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Not a problem. Very good. Hopefully the weather stays good. We had a storm earlier this afternoon, so hopefully stays away.
Let's cross our fingers. It's not looking too pretty out west as well. So I wanted to get you on and kind of just preview the game up ahead. But of course, I wanted to rewind a little bit and talk about Mario Alford and how exciting he is as a player, obviously coming off the kind of walk-off touchdown. How fun is it just to kind of watch him up close and personal, day to day?
It's been great. I remember it was either 21 or 2022 where he had the hat trick, where in one season he had a kick return, field goal return, and a punt return for a touchdown. He's so dynamic, and I am very excited to see that he's back doing what we know he can do, because last season it didn't look too great. He was running out of bounds a lot, which we thought was weird. We thought maybe it was an injury or something, but he just didn't have that explosiveness. He says he wasn't listening to the media reports, but there was a lot of media out there who was saying, cut Mario Alford. He's done. Bring in someone new. Go younger. But he's come out with a vengeance this season, and it's good to see. I like Mario Alford. He's one of the good guys on that team, always willing to talk and nice about it. So happy to see he's back out doing what we know he can do.
We host a weekly show with Coach Phil, a Riders fan, so I have an idea of how some Riders fans are feeling. But Britton, obviously you have a better pulse on the fan base. How do you think the fan base overall is kind of feeling with the 3-0 start? I know some may be unhappy a little bit with kind of maybe the quote unquote sloppy victories, but at the end of the day, wins are wins. And I think come October, November, nobody's remembering how you won in June and early July. So kind of just your pulse on the fan base, after the 3-0 start.
Yeah, it's cautiously optimistic because the Riders haven't played great football for a full game yet. We're still waiting for them to do that. Brett Lother's struggles has a lot of people concerned because we know how good he can be. Kind of what's happening, they'll figure it out. But it's cautiously optimistic because they are 3-0. Now, you can argue who they've beaten. They've beaten all East Division teams. This will be the first West team that they face, maybe a good real test for them. But this team on paper, we all expected them to be better. They were kind of one of the picks to go to the Grey Cup by a lot of people. It's a good start. You just want more from this team because you expect it with all the guys they brought back, all the hype around them. You're just still wanting more from a 3-0 team, which is kind of a weird spot to be in.
It's a good thing, though, obviously, with the expectation and wanting more as a 3-0 team. I'm curious now with obviously looking at your team, I think kind of why maybe I tend to maybe give them a little bit more of a break of, the injuries that they've been going through. But with the injuries, some of the, depth and kind of, I guess they've been able to show their depth with other guys stepping up. And I believe it's three guys that have had three different receivers that have had 100-yard receiving games.
Mm-hmm.
You look at AJ Ouellette, who's looked a lot better this season. Thomas the Train obviously comes in I believe week 2 was it, and has himself a phenomenal game. You bring in Kadeem Carey, and obviously AJ Ouellette kind of gets a lot healthier magically after that addition. You look at the depth of your skill position players and them stepping up on a week-to-week basis. How much of, maybe not a luxury, but just how beneficial, I guess, is that for the Riders as a team to have be able to lean on with guys like MLS and maybe KSB out of the lineup, and obviously Picton's, I know, kind of banged up, but him stepping up with a big catch last week, and maybe a Deshaun Mims being able to step up this week with, as I mentioned, some of that depth that the Riders are able to have.
It's extremely important. That was one of the reasons why we like this team so much in the preseason and during training camp ahead of it. They went out and signed a bunch of depth. Now, I know Dante Myers and Keyshawn Johnson are kind of emerging as receivers that other markets are taking notice of. We've known about them here. We've known the talent they've had. Keyshawn Johnson ended last year strong. He was a guy who I predicted in the season preview show. I think he finishes the season top 5 receiving yards and top 5 in touchdowns. He's a great talent this team has, but the offensive line injuries are always funny with this team. After last season, having 13 different offensive starters, a lot of people had concerns about them. And meanwhile, myself, other media here, based on the fact that they had 13 different starters and still looked pretty good, we didn't have a whole lot of concern about it. That team's very good. Edwin Harrison, it's an Edwin Harrison we trust out here because the offensive line coach has just worked with guys. No matter who's there, they've continued to just be very good, and they've only given up 2 sacks so far this season. That's just a testament to the work they're doing. But yes, depth is huge for this team, huge across the offense, but we knew that was happening. When you looked at this team's roster, you knew they had guys who could step up because we've seen them due to the injuries this team has had the past couple of seasons.
So going into this game, I think both fan bases have had all eyes on the injury report for both teams. And obviously, I was just chatting about Trevor Harris and Nathan Rourke before you joined us. I'm curious, with obviously you being at practice every day and all that, is there any sort of kind of maybe updates you're able to give us and provide us on Trevor Harris? I know he's dealing with the infection / maybe illness, head injury.
Yeah, not too much because today was closed practice, so we're not allowed to watch that. That's where they do a lot of the secret stuff, I guess, where they don't want us there. But he was out there today. And when I saw the injury report come out, it was a full participant. If he was limited, I would still lean Jake Maier starting. But with a veteran quarterback, your starting quarterback, when he logs just one full practice, you feel good about him starting, especially a guy like Trevor Harris, who's been in the system for a year now, a guy who's just been in a lot of systems over the years with Trevor Harris, but you have trust in him being able to go out there and succeed even on just one practice a week. So I feel good about him going out there now, once again, after seeing the full thing, but he is listed as questionable. So we'll have to see how they elect to kind of work that. I still lean Trevor Harris starting, but they could maybe just give him an extra week because the Riders do have the bye week next week.
Okay, so when talking about the matchup now, I'm curious if you could just give us some of your thoughts of maybe, first the Riders offense going up against BC's defense, and then kind of flipping it over to the other side of the ball of Riders defense against BC's offense. How are you feeling generally about the matchup this upcoming Saturday?
I think just what I've seen so far, the Riders, you have to feel good about both sides of the ball for them. BC's defense struggled against Winnipeg. They allowed Chris Streveler to have a passing clinic day, which I did not expect to see from Chris Streveler. So there's concerns there. With Trevor Harris, he just keeps the ball so clean. He doesn't usually put it into tough spots. He has thrown some bad interceptions we're not used to seeing from him so far this season. I think the offensive line, always a little bit of a concern because you are starting pretty much a rookie left tackle in Daniel Johnson. Matthew Betts, we know what he can do, right? He can destroy a game if he gets going. So you have to kind of keep him keep him from doing that. But I like the Riders offense going against this defense because, like I said, the BC defense just hasn't looked as dynamic as I thought they would look. I thought they would be a little bit better. I picked them to finish second in the division. They just haven't quite taken that step. Flipping it around, it ultimately came down to Jeremiah Mazzoli or if Nathan Rourke's playing. Doesn't sound like Nathan Rourke's playing. Jeremiah Mazzoli, once again, it looked like he struggled against Winnipeg. The footwork just felt off. It looked like he was forcing passes that just weren't there. And this is a very opportunistic Riders defense that should already have five or six interceptions. They don't have that many because they've dropped them. They'll eventually figure that out. But in terms of it being Jeremiah Mazzoli, I really like the Riders' chances because this team, you can't run on them. They're only giving up, I think it's about 50 yards per game on the ground. Very good run defense, forces you to become one-dimensional. And I don't think Jeremiah Mazzoli at this point in his career, unfortunately dealt with all those injuries, has that ability to be that dynamic quarterback that he has been in the past.
Yeah, I agree. Lastly, wanted to ask you about someone who's actually kind of struggled to start the season, and maybe the temperature that's maybe ratcheted up on him in terms of maybe the expectations with the fan base versus maybe in that building with Brett Lothard, who's obviously struggled, as I mentioned, and kind of what's been going on, maybe, as I mentioned, kind of the heat versus, inside that building of, I would feel like maybe bringing in some competition, but not wanting to, tell him that he's out the door, obviously. But what's just your general feelings on the struggle so far of Brett Lothard?
Well, there's heat from the fan base, but I don't think there's that much heat inside the locker room there with the coaching staff. He was so good to end last season. He only missed one kick after he had a terrible game against Montreal last year. Came back, only missed one kick, and that was a 60-yarder as time expired to try to beat Winnipeg, which you're not hitting many 60-yarders no matter who you are. So Brett Lothard, we've talked about it. It feels like it maybe is the hold. They have a new holder this year because Adam Korsak retired in the offseason. Joe Couch is the team's new punter. He's a new holder. They're kind of working through that, though. I spoke to special teams coordinator Kent Majeri out here. He said it's not the hold. He said Brett's just kind of working through something and compared it to a golf swing. If you just switch one little thing, sometimes you don't even notice you switch something. All of a sudden, you're just off to the right or you're off to the left, and you're not really sure why. They're working through it with Brett. They think he'll be fine. He's hit so many big kicks for this franchise since he's been here. They're going to let him work through it. And luckily for him and for this team, they've been good enough where it hasn't cost them a win yet. Still 3-0. That helps kind of keep the temperature down. Now, who's to say if he goes out and misses 4 kicks again or 3 kick field goals again, do they bring someone in? At that point, you probably need to at least bring someone in if he doesn't ever figure it out.
All right, Brendan. Last question for you, and it's actually a non-matchup question, but it's been a hot topic within the CFL community, and Luke Wilson's obviously sparked it. But I believe you had a good tweet the other day of mentioning about the, Luke Wilson's kind of wanting to maybe, in his way, make the CFL a little bit better. And I know, I believe it was your tweet that you mentioned about, a video game and kind of the effects that I think a video game could bring. And personally, I think it would be a great idea with just I think kind of what you were trying to kind of relate of like how many little kids growing up that maybe weren't NFL fans played with some random, New York Jets receiver and became fan of the New York Jets because they were, going for big games and stuff like that on Madden versus like the younger demographic that I think the CFL is trying to attract. Just what are your thoughts on kind of the general topic that's been very hot within the CFL community?
Well, I think that you should always be willing to look at the game. Every league should be looking how they can make the game better. And I know with the CFL, there's a lot of diehards, and these rules have been these rules for a while. I don't think it's terrible to just take a step back and be like, well, why is it like this? Why do we do this? I don't agree with changing a bunch of rules, but there are certain things I would change, like the Rouge. I think you should only get 1 point if the ball's in play. If you kick the ball 20 yards to the left, but it just goes through the end zone, why do you get a point maybe at the end of a game? I think the Riders last year, it was against Toronto. Liram, the kicker there, punted or field goal kicked it. He was celebrating already. He missed it wide left, but he knew he booted it far enough into the end zone for the point. So, I mean, there's things you can change. I had a good laugh when Luke went right for the last 3 minutes of the game because outside of 3 downs, that's the most sacred part of the game. Do not change the last 3 minutes. And he was willing to go after that. Always willing to have a discussion. I didn't agree with his assessment of things. I thought he's using confrontational language. And I mean, it's driving a conversation, right? Maybe to his benefit. But absolutely, we should be taking a look at things. I'm not saying we need to change a bunch of things. I don't personally think we do. But you have to look at it. gate receipts, people aren't going to games as much anymore. Why is that? Why isn't this translating? Is it just marketing, or is there something deeper? And I think you have to at least be willing to have conversations about why things aren't working.
Yeah, it's a great conversation to be had, and this was another good conversation had, Britton. I appreciate you jumping on and chatting a little bit about the BC Lions taking on the Saskatchewan Roughriders this Saturday. Before we get you out of here, let the people know where they can find you on social media and what you got going on online.
Well, you can find me on X at Britton Gray, my name. I'm on Blue Sky. I need to start posting more on Blue Sky. I really do. I need to figure out how so I can post at both at the same time. That'd be the easiest. And then YouTube at Green Zone SK. That's the Green Zone account. Myself and Jamie and I, we have the Blitz podcast every week where it's a rider centric, but we go around the CFL, talk a little bit about everything. And of course, on the Green Zone on Rourke Radio, 980 CJME, 650 CKOM in Regina, on the Green Zone as we enjoy what we hope to be a successful season here in Saskatchewan.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you jumping on, Britton, and hopefully we'll chat soon.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. That was Britton Gray, Riders reporter, joining us for our week number 4 BC Lions preview. Very appreciative of Britton for jumping on here and chatting for a few moments with us. Now, as we continue with our BC Lions preview, we get into the highly talked about and people waiting to see the status of one Nathan Rourke, the BC Lions injury report. All right, the BC Lions injury report, and it is a lengthy one, folks. Sorry, I can feel a burp coming on. My apologies. Hopefully you guys can hear that. I realize that I'm wearing the mic now, and I belched right into the mic, so I apologize if you guys heard that. I didn't mean to get that right into your guys' living room or right into your ears. But let's get into the BC Lions injury report. As I mentioned, it's a lengthy one. We'll start from the top and work our way down to one Nathan Rourke. So, as I talked about, Dejon Allen, DNP all 3 days, listed as out for this game. The, I think, positive sign for this one is that he wasn't placed on the 6-game injured list right away. So that is a good sign initially. Now, I think there is still some pause for wanting to celebrate too long. I think they're probably evaluating things still. And it seems like it's pretty, I don't want to say maybe serious, but a pretty significant injury that's listed as a arm injury. I believe it is up near the shoulder area, where I saw he had a wrap on after the game last week. Dejon Allen's going to be a big one, especially versus Saskatchewan Roughriders to be out. When you look at who's going to be filling in, it will be Chris Slugger. Came to the BC Lions last year in free agency. Has that versatility to play guard and tackle. Was looked at as to be in competition for that left guard spot coming into the season with Corey Woodruff. Corey Woodruff ends up winning that spot, which you could not argue, but obviously Dejon Allen misses the majority of training camp due to the back spasms. Chris Slugger has to go out to that right tackle position, which, is a good thing that, when looking at a silver lining to the Dejon injury, having Chris Slugger having filled in for basically the entirety of training camp, preseason game, he has the experience reps recently at that right tackle position, so hopefully he's able to come in, fill in that spot adequately, and do a good job this Saturday, because the BC Lions are going to need it versus that Saskatchewan pass rush. Now, when going down the injury report, you have a Stanley Berryhill, who is a questionable 3 days as a limited participant with a thigh injury after missing the game last week. I wonder how close Stanley is. I believe it was Seven McGee, Farhan Alalji reported today, left practice with a leg injury as well. He's not on the injury report as of today. I would imagine maybe that was towards the end of practice. Stanley Berryhill is another one to keep an eye out. Jackson Finley is going to miss his first professional ball game. He's going to miss it with a hamstring injury. Don't know what happened to him, but we saw it early in the game last week where he went into the under the tent, got looked at, came back out pretty quickly, but obviously was something bothering him, pulled hammy or something was tight. So unfortunately, they're going to be without Jackson Finley as well as linebacker Jeremy Lewis out with a foot injury. Returning to the lineup will be Marcus Moore, D lineman, who's been, I know, going through what's it's listed as load management. I think they're trying to bring him back as slow as possible while also trying to keep him fresh. I don't know if he's. I feel like he's been healthy for the last maybe few weeks after dealing with the head injury in the preseason game, the first preseason game, and not feeling the effects till a few days after. Went through the concussion protocol and now looks to be returning to the lineup as he is available. Another body is going to miss this game is Kieran Passant, 3 straight DNPs and is listed as out with another thigh injury as well. And then another big one, when looking at the defense, is Jonah Tavai is going to miss this game with a calf injury, which is a great sign to see that it's only a calf injury. At the game, it maybe looked like it could have been a potential knee injury or something that was definitely more significant than a calf injury. Hopefully, he's going to be able to return. He didn't leave the sideline after his injury last week, which was probably the initial good sign that it wasn't anything too serious. If it was a torn ACL or anything like that, he would have obviously went to the locker room. Jonah Tavai has arguably been, I think, the BC Lions' best defender so far through 3 games this season, and is going to be a huge loss. With that being said, I think having a guy like Marcus Moore coming in off the sidelines per se from an injury is a nice bonus to have. Having a guy like Christian Covington with the NFL experience behind him is another benefit to have if you're the BC Lions. And those 2 guys are going to have to step up big time this week. And when you look at the D-tackle position, maybe the BC Lions were maybe most adequate to deal with a few injuries at that position. When you look at guys like Thibaut Tabaye, who's another solid depth option in the D-tackle room. How do the BC Lions respond, especially with a Saskatchewan offense coming in that is going to look to run the football and not shy away from questioning the BC Lions' physicality, which multiple teams have done this season already and for the past few seasons? I think the loss of Jonah Tobias is a big one, but when looking at a spotlight, is a big spotlight to put on guys like Christian Covington that can have an impact in this game, as well as I mentioned, Marcus Moore, guys that competitors number one, but are going to feel the urgency of Jonah Tobias played great number one. And as soon as I get into the starting lineup, whoever it may be, opposite of Dwayne Hendricks at the defensive tackle position, I don't want to leave the field. I don't want to come out, especially if you're Christian Covington, who's been now, relegated to the bench in some ways, right? Of, being looked at as this prized NFL veteran, being a late signing to the BC Lions last season, has some ups, has some downs last year. Thought he was going to come in and have a pretty good season this year. I thought, having a full training camp, having a full off season to get used to the CFL game, he ends up starting the season as a backup, and that's no slight at Christian Covington. I think that just shows the caliber of play up here in the CFL. And now is going to be an opportunity for Christian Covington to show the coaches, show Buck Pierce, show Mike Benavides that, once you put me back into the starting lineup, if it is Covington, you're not going to want to take me off the field because I'm going to be making multiple plays a game. And hopefully is a good problem to have if you're the BC Lions, that, one of the two of, Marcus Moore, Christian Covington can step up in the absence of Jonah Tavai in the middle of their defense. So let's talk about the man himself that has been talked about, obviously, for the last 2 weeks of if he's playing, if he's not. One Nathan Rourke went through practice as, was it a limited participant for the last 2 days? Yes, a limited participant for the last 3 days, with his oblique injury, and is another one that I echo as I did last week. I think it's a perfectly acceptable decision to keep him out of this game once again, or dress him as that emergency third quarterback. I think, unfortunately, there's probably not an ideal return game with the next month of the season coming up of the Saskatchewan Roughriders and their pass rush, the Montreal Alouettes, the best pass rush in the CFL. I'll stand on that. Edmonton, Edmonton, I think, is still wanting to see maybe another year from them with the Jake Serezans, Robbie Smiths, the guys that they brought over from Toronto, and um, some of the guys that were already there. I think they're going to want to see them step up even more. I question, when are we going to see Nathan Rourke again? When thinking about a oblique injury and if he's able to throw in, a limited capacity, say within, 10, 20, 30 yards per se, and it's being reported that he's not throwing any deep balls. Let's say that in game situations, defensive linemen are chasing him. Defensive linemen are not only chasing him, they're trying to hit him. They're trying to knock his helmet off. They're trying to knock his freaking helmet off. Um, Not only that, like, I'm not trying to say anybody's dirty, but they're trying to hurt him. If we're calling a spade, defensive players, defensive linemen are trying to hurt the opposing team's quarterback. Let's just call it the way it is. It's not dirty. That's the way football is. That's the way defensive linemen are. That's the way defensive players are. So to say that Nathan Rourke is able to throw, but not any capacity that's maybe a deeper pass, that tells me that things are still a little bit tender. That tells me things are still, they're still working through some things. He's not 100%. And I think that is the key to this injury and returning back to the lineup for Nathan Rourke, is bring Nathan Rourke back to the starting lineup when he is 100% and nothing else. Don't risk losing Nathan Rourke long term with a torn oblique or anything worse, because you wanted to rush him back early on in the season and you lose him for the rest of it. Let him recover. Let him get back to 100%, because something like an oblique injury is nothing to mess around with, especially when other teams are going full speed and trying to hit Nathan as hard as they possibly can, knowing good and well that he has that injury. So resting him, I think, is perfectly acceptable, in my opinion. I don't know how the rest of the fan base feels with the urgency of the thought of maybe falling to 1-3, which is definitely not ideal. But as I mentioned, falling to 1-3, falling to 1-4, I'm sure the questions will start to come and the panic will start to set in. Get that game versus Edmonton, split versus Saskatchewan early on, and get to 2-5, and hang around. Excuse me, get to 3-5. Hang around, and then you get, I believe it's Hamilton at home, and I believe Toronto in Toronto, and you start to get a little bit more of a easier schedule at that time. So get out of this next stretch 4-4. Bring Nathan back maybe in that that Edmonton game. I'm very cautious about bringing back a Nathan Rourke versus that Montreal front, man. That Montreal front is no flipping joke, and has been getting off to the quarterback at a impressive and at a high level early on in the season, and it's something that you don't want to mess around with. If Nathan Rourke is 100%, and you got Isaac Emmy Bertolin and Lual Ugowak and the rest of that defensive line, Jeffrey Canton-Arcou coming up from that linebacker and creeping up into some of those muggy fronts that they present that the Alouettes like to do. I question whether that is the best decision, of course, if Nathan Rourke is 100%. So that is the injury report for the BC Lions. When flipping over things to the matchup that is this game, when talking about the BC Lions offense first before we get into their defense, when looking at the BC Lions offense taking on the Saskatchewan Roughriders this week, There's a lot of questions that come to mind. There's a lot of scenarios and thoughts that come to mind when thinking about this matchup. I hate to say that it's unfortunate that I have to think about some of those thoughts with the idea of Jeremiah Masoli leading this offense instead of Nathan Rourke, which um, obviously I don't want to. It sounds like a very big slight at Masoli, which I don't want it to, because I hate when guys like me or media members are basically armchair quarterbacks and they're able to sit here and criticize a guy that they can't do to a fraction of that level. I do hate doing it. That being said, the field that I'm getting in, kind of it comes with the territory of having to criticize people. It just it is the facts, right? It is This game is completely different going into it, looking at it from if Nathan Rourke's going against this defense at 100% right now, I'm thinking about, you know, can you I guess I'm trying to phrase this right with obviously how BC's looked, but as Britton said, right, with setting expectations and them wanting more within that fan base, and obviously sometimes they could be maybe spoiled fans. I don't think they are in this instance. They want more because the Saskatchewan Roughriders haven't looked as Britton said their best yet through 3 games. They are still 3-0 at the end of the day, which is most important. They've only beaten Eastern Division teams. Coach Phil quoted it as saying on our weekly show of, this looks like a very beatable team. So I think with the Nathan Rourke led team, we're going in saying, not to, I know there's probably going to be people that say I'm cocky or whatever you may want to look at it, but, can the Riders keep up basically? And I don't want to say that in a funny way, but I just think Nathan Rourke, the way he looked in that second half versus Edmonton, obviously the Winnipeg first half and the rest of that game didn't go the way the way that the fan base would have, liked. That being said, I think Nathan, that's not the Nathan Rourke. I think he does struggle versus Winnipeg. That's some legitimate question marks that need to be figured out. But I think the Nathan Rourke is the the level of play is a lot better than I think people were ready to once again bury him after one bad performance. But we'll wait till he returns to the lineup. Once again, let's just talk about who we have on the field to talk about. And I think the number one priority for whoever's under center for the BC Lions, say if it is Nathan Rourke in a game time decision and he gets the nod, Masoli, Bryce, Rourke, protect the frickin' quarterback. The unfortunate side of things for the offensive line, I think they've played pretty good for the majority of the first 3 games of the season. It's the unfortunate side of well-timed sacks that end drives, stunt momentum for the BC Lions that just shouldn't happen in terms of the BC Lions have, say, 7, 8 guys in protection with Riley Pickett in the game as an extra fullback, Andrew Pearson in the game as an extra offensive lineman, James Butler in the backfield as a running back, and you have your 5 offensive linemen, and teams are only rushing 4, 5, even sometimes 3 dudes, and they're getting pressure on your quarterback. That is unacceptable in all fashions. And as I mentioned, is the unfortunate side of is it Will Campbell? I don't know if it's I don't know if I'm butchering his name right now, but the New England Patriots offensive tackle they drafted in the first round. Forgive me if I am butchering his name or if I'm getting it wrong. Feel free to comment it down below. But Will Campbell mentioned, or the Patriots first round offensive tackle mentioned in an interview when he was at LSU of, a defensive lineman, if he gets 1 sack a game throughout a, say, 16-game regular season, he's going to be a first round pick, arguably a top 10 pick. If a offensive lineman gives up a sack a game for a 16-game stretch, he said he's going to be working at Amazon. That's what he was quoted as saying, which is true, right? And is the margin for error as an offensive lineman of you could have a fantastic 3/4 of the game, but if you give up a sack, say on a big third down that knocks you out of field goal range, and that's kind of the easy glaring point, the easy we're putting the blame on you. It's kind of hard to justify the rest of the good play, which is I think the unfortunate part for the offensive line, because I think they played solid to a solid level, but as I mentioned, it's the bad timing for sacks given up. It's the unable to convert or get a good push in the short areas, opportunities. And it's something that needs to just be better. And then when you look at Dejan Allen being out of this game, Chris Slugger, hopefully he's able to bring some of that physicality and hopefully he's able to play to a good level, at least to the floor of Dejan Allen, because pass protection wise, Dejan Allen's played fairly well at his right tackle position going up against the first three opponents of the season. So when continuing to go down the list, I think when looking at the rest of maybe to close out the offensive line point, I'm curious kind of with Tyler Packer starting at right guard, most likely once again with Masoli being likely the starting quarterback just due to ratio flexibility. George Una, when is he going to be available to the BC Lions, which I believe he was, and maybe it's something that I shouldn't say, when is he going to be available? When is he going to be brought back into the lineup if he's available or listed as available, which he is on the injury report? He's been available for the last, 3 games. Yeah, 3 games to start the year, which I think is an interesting one. Of why he's not being brought back into that starting lineup, especially with now injuries happening at his position. George Una was your, projected starter at right guard, and now he's available for the last 3 weeks, and it's crickets. There's no update. There's no, Una's close to return, which we've had with Josh Woods. The update of, on First and Now, I believe it was Baker who mentioned he's close. It was close to the 1-year mark of when he officially tore his ACL last year. So he's close to returning. He's been at practice. He's working through some things. But, Anna Una is another one that's been, kind of really quiet on that end of things. So, maybe potentially my bad in terms of being at the post-game media availability and not asking a question to Buck Pierce of why that's not the case, but something to keep an eye on for sure. When going down the list, talking about the BC Lions offense, I talked about it on the post-game show. This BC Lions offense right now is Justin McInnes, Keon Hatcher, or bust. And to me, guys like Javon Katoy, guys like Aiden Eberhardt, they need to step out. Step up. If Stanley Berryhill's back, he's another guy that needs to step up. Build off his impressive start to the season in his week 1 game. 2 touchdowns. Came back, was very quiet in week number 2. Didn't play in week number 3. He needs to come back, make his presence felt. James Butler. James Butler has been a tough one for me. Another tough one, another tough conversation to be had when looking at JB, when thinking about, his workload, his usage. I think JB has been, unfortunately, a victim to game script and the Lions being down early on. And I know Coach Phil, I mentioned on the post game as well, like those guys were critical of Buck Pierce being like, Buck Pierce needs to realize who he has, and they can't keep running the ball into the ground, and they need to adapt their offense. He only had 9 carries last week. And as I said earlier in the season, is only a fraction of what I think he's going to be able to have in a game where he's going to have maybe close to 30 touches later in the season. I think this is a game where you need to get James Butler, around 20 touches mark, around, 15 carries, 4 or 5 catches out of the backfield, I think is a sweet spot, especially with that pass rush number 1, maybe throwing some screen passes, throwing some, running back swing passes out of the backfield to get that ball out of Masoli's hands, get the ball out of the quarterback's hands, into a weapon's hands, that is James Butler, who can be a weapon out of the backfield. Get James Butler as a feature into this offense, especially if guys like Katoy, Eberhardt, and Berryhill aren't consistently able to, step up and be a threat to the opposing defense. As I said, right now it's McInnes, Hatcher, and teams are not scared of the BC Lions weapons right now. And if they can take them away, they feel like they can win the game or do a pretty good job in limiting the BC Lions being able to score. So when looking down the list, biggest factor, and we'll talk about actually, I guess, the red zone in a second. take care of the football. The BC Lions have to take care of the football this week because it'll be another. Well, it'll be the same shit, different day. If I'm being honest, of if you lose the turnover battle and you're hanging around with Saskatchewan and it's feeling like you're hanging around, but they're 10-point lead the whole time, they're in cruise control. They're feeling like they're in control the entire game, where you're feeling like you're playing catch up and you're not able to play the style of play that I think that you want to. You're not able to play up to, I think, your standard because you're trying to chase. The BC Lions need to take care of the football. They can't have another 4 turnover game. They can't lose the turnover battle 4-2. It'd be great if the BC Lions could win the turnover battle and cause a few turnovers defensively, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But the BC Lions must take care of the football in this one, especially against that Saskatchewan Roughriders defense, who will look to turn over the football. Jeremiah Masoli has to make sure he does a better job with that. Although you could say, it's hard to put blame on the backwards pass that hits James Butler right in the chest. Interception to Parker was a tough one. You maybe would have liked to see him eat that one. And then the Evan Holmes one was a phenomenal play on Evan Holmes' part. And I know there were some people that questioned whether or not that ball hit the ground, or at least the ground helped Evan Holmes maintain possession of that ball. So let's talk about the BC Lions defense versus that Saskatchewan Roughriders offense. I think is another conversation that is going to change due to who's at quarterback, right? It looks, as of now, I would think and expect to see Trevor Harris, as Britton mentioned, of a veteran like Trevor, having a full practice under his belt, knowing the offense. I would expect Trevor Harris to be under center for the Saskatchewan Roughriders on Saturday. That being said, if it is Jake Maier, I think you need to, either way, you kind of have to get after either quarterback. But Jake Maier specifically, it's tough to get after a guy like Trevor Harris because he gets the ball out so fast. So even if you get there, the ball is coming out before you're even able to get to that, before you're even able to get to the quarterback, which is the beauty of Trevor Harris for sure. A positive side of Trevor Harris's game with his release time. Jake Maier isn't typically a quick read kind of quarterback where he's getting the ball out of his hands to his playmakers. I think if you're able to get some pressure on him, get him flustered early, that's very good sign for the BC Lions early on in the game. That being said, I think when looking at Trevor Harris and the likelihood of him starting, and me looking at that matchup more than Jake Maier, yes, getting after Trevor Harris, as I said, would be a positive and a plus, but him getting the ball out so quick kind of defeats the purpose of a pass rush. So for me, I think the aggressiveness, the physicality within the secondary needs to be high this game in terms of being aggressive with the receivers within that range that you're allowed to do so, because taking away that first read, whether it's with timing, whether it's with basically timing when you're trying to be aggressive, right? Where you're trying to be in the receiver's face, you're trying to jam him up, you're trying to slow him down in his route, where you're trying to slow, Trevor Harris is used to, the rhythm, the timing as a quarterback that, my receiver's going to be here, my first read's going to be here, my second read's going to be here. If you can throw off the timing and fluster a quarterback to what he's maybe not normally used to, I think is a huge advantage, especially versus a guy like Trevor Harris. That is a good quarterback if you're not able to get some pressure on him, and if you're not able to, start to maybe second guess himself. And it could be a long day if he's able to start getting in rhythm. Of course, the BC Lions have to be better, and this is going to be talked about until the cows come home, until the BC Lions prove that they can stop it. And they could do a good job this game, and they'll still be talked about in 3 weeks' time. In heck, next week when the BC Lions go to Montreal, it'll be talked about, because that's exactly what the Montreal Alouettes going to do. That's a brand of football like they play as well. That teams are going to come in to play the BC Lions, and they're going to challenge the BC Lions' physicality. They're going to challenge their toughness. They're going to challenge if they can, man up, if they have a backbone, if they can kind of, stand up, I guess, and say, what, I'm not going to allow you to run all over me. I'm not going to allow you to be the more physical team. And is exactly what Saskatchewan is going to want to do, right? It's exactly what a Corey Mace-led team is going to want to do. A.J. Ouellette running the ball between the tackles, downhill. Thomas the Train, as I said. Thomas Bertrand Houdon. If I did butcher his name, I apologize, Thomas. That's why I like to call you Thomas the Train, as well as it being a sweet nickname. But they're going to want to run the rock and look to, challenge the BC Lions. Can you stop it? You allowed a rookie running back to rip for 130 yards on 23 carries. I would think that the Saskatchewan Roughriders offensive line, A.J. Ouellette, and the rest of that offense are licking their chops at the fact that they maybe have an opportunity here to go for a big game versus the West Coast BC Lions, who looked at they want no part of playing in physical ball games, which is an unfortunate one. And I think is something that needs to be answered. We've talked about it now since 22 playoffs, when the Bombers gashed them, and it was the same thing that we saw in the regular season, versus basically, they challenged BC physicality. BC hung around and couldn't answer the bell in 22. In 23, it was basically the same thing. Last year versus Saskatchewan, similar thing, although I'd argue that the team kind of self-imploded more so than anything that was maybe Saskatchewan's doing in that game particularly. Anyways, when going down the list and looking at this matchup, I talked about the depth for the Saskatchewan Roughriders and how valuable that's been for them. I think you need to, challenge that depth of, can they continue to beat you with some of those guys? And you need to make sure that those guys, test if they're able to be consistent, right? No Sam Amulis. I believe no Keon Schaefer-Baker. Keyshawn Johnson missing the majority of the week due to personal reasons. Sean Bain Jr. hasn't played yet this season. A.J. Ouellette, although I will admit he has looked good in the last, or in his 2 out of 3 games that he's played, 2 games he's actually played. He's looked fairly decent. He's popped off. He's flashed, I guess is the best way to put it. You need to capitalize off some of those missing pieces, right? And, no Mitch Picton. Deshaun Mims could be in the starting lineup this week as one of their Canadian receivers. You need to make sure that, whether it's a Deshaun Mims who gets those one-on-one opportunities, you take away, a Keyshawn Johnson, I forget Myers' first name, but he went off for a 100-yard game that kind of came out of nowhere. A pleasant surprise for Riders fans, but for BC Lions fans, I would imagine they're not going to want to see a 4th week in a row and a new 4th different receiver to go over 100 yards for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So they have to make sure that they take advantage of the missing pieces, the missing weapons offensively for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, defensively for the BC Lions. And I think is a huge factor, right? If you're able to potentially load the box, and as I be careful with how I'm wording this, because I dared the BC Lions to load the box versus Winnipeg 2 weeks ago versus Chris Strubler, and they got absolutely gashed. So versus a Trevor Harris team, heck, even a Jake Mayer-led team, with as long as the offensive lineman is able to give them time, can that defense prove? Can that defense secondary prove that they can make plays downfield? Because as of now, it kind of feels like the big plays that come around game to game, the Lions just aren't making it. They're watching the other team making it. I know, as I said, I hate to be critical, but it's much easier said than done. Watching from my house, watching from the couch, watching from the press box, or watching from my seat in BC Place. I get that. But as of now, it feels like the Lions are just a half step behind in terms of when the play needs to be made. The Lions aren't making them right now, and is going to be a huge factor when it comes to playing Saskatchewan, Montreal, these good teams. They make the plays that need to be mattered. They make the big time moment plays where in the clutch in the 4th quarter, after the 3-minute warning, they rise to the occasion. They live for those moments. So it's something that the BC Lions are going to need to get better at as well, of rising to the occasion and not holding under the pressure in terms of when the moment is called upon, you need to answer the bell. And it's something that the Lions need to get better at. So before we get out of here, folks, of course, we have our 3 keys to the game for the BC Lions to close out our week 4 preview. Of course, guys, if you guys liked the video, please like the video if you liked the video. Comment down below how you guys are feeling about the matchup. Comment down below if you guys are Rider fans. Comment down below if you guys are first-time viewers, listeners to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. When you guys subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. You guys get notified every single time we go live or upload any sort of content here on the channel. So 3 keys to victory for the BC Lions this week when they take on the Saskatchewan Roughriders this Saturday. First and foremost, the BC Lions have to do a way, way better job. They have not done this the first 3 weeks of the season. They have to have a fast start to the game. They cannot be down 7-0. They cannot be down 10-3 and allow the other team to get you out of your game script, get you out of maybe your philosophy and what you want to do offensively. And I think it's what's been happening the last 3 weeks of the BC Lions of down early in ball games. They're not able to lean on James Butler as much as they should or could. And it's something that in a Winnipeg, in a Saskatchewan, in a Montreal, getting down early and in those hostile environments is a absolute nightmare. Regardless if 17,000, 20,000, 25,000 show up in Saskatchewan on Saturday, start fast, weather that storm, weather that hostile environment, and make sure that you guys are kind of on the same footing, going into the second quarter even, right? Tie ball game. You could even live with, a 3-point deficit and something like that. Make sure that you kind of go into the second quarter and it's kind of, things are all good. You're not, and I wouldn't say even panic is the right word, but down 7-0 and you're kind of like, oh man, like we're in this already. Like you're making it a habit. You're making this routine of being down early in ball games, and it's something that the BC Lions need to fix. Next, the BC Lions need to be better in the red zone. Last week, outside of the turnovers and being kind of the biggest reason I think the BC Lions lost, 1 for 4 in the red zone and not converting in the red zone is a huge killer. Missing out on points, not being able to convert, kicking field goals instead of being able to punch it in for 6 points and getting a touchdown is massive. And it's something that's going to be an important one. Every point's going to count in this one. Hopefully, if you're from a Lions perspective, you're hoping Brett Lawler continues to struggle from a kicking outlook. Every point is going to matter, and being able to convert those 3s for 6s and hopefully 7s is going to be a huge benefit for the BC Lions when it comes to the end of this game and hopefully winning this one. The BC Lions need to make sure that they're finishing drives with touchdowns and not field goals and not coming away with points. Unacceptable this week. They need to make sure that once they get in the red zone, points are being put on the board. It's an automatic 3 points because Sean White is Mr. Automatic himself. So last and not least, you've heard me mention it a few times, folks, but play with more physicality. The Saskatchewan Roughriders, Corey Mace, are going to question how physical this team can be. Do they have a backbone, and can they stand up to this the level of physicality that they're going to play at, right? Because the Saskatchewan Roughriders play with they're a tough football team, and that's kind of the way they're built for a reason. The identity of a head coach makes kind of sense, right? Play with physicality, be the more physical team, and I think the BC Lions will be in position or hang around this game and make things interesting come the fourth quarter. Lastly, not a key to the game, but just something that I think the Lions need to is maybe Captain Obvious is something why I didn't want to put this in the 3 keys of the game, which you could argue all 3 of our keys almost every week are kind of the the cliches, I guess, but cliches are cliches for a reason, I believe is the saying. But the BC Lions have to be the more desperate team. And obviously, when you look at their records, 1-2, 3-0, it makes perfect sense of why the Lions have to be the more desperate team. But the Lions need to play like the more desperate team. They can't just act like it. They can't just show up and think that that's all good and dandy. The Lions need to go out on the field and show that they're the more desperate team, that any 50-50 balls, they're catching them. They're recovering them, whether it's a fumble. They're intercepting them. They're, whatever it may be. 50-50 balls are the BC Lions. The hustle plays are the BC Lions. The, effort plays are the BC Lions. Those things, those little things, they have to have a high motor on Saturday. They have to rise to the occasion. They have to play to the level of the Saskatchewan Roughriders that I think are going to play on Saturday, which is, I think I've said arguably because now Winnipeg Blue Bombers have kind of shut me up a little bit, and I think rightfully proven that they are still maybe the class of the West of, I've said and I thought that maybe the West ran through Saskatchewan going into the season. Saskatchewan has to go out and prove it, right? And if BC can knock them off and kind of maybe I think devalue Saskatchewan's 3-0 start a little bit of like, they took advantage of a pretty soft start. BC has the opportunity to do that. That being said, Saskatchewan at the end of the day, as I've kind of leaned towards, they win ball games. Close games late, they're finding the ways to make plays, as we've seen with Mario Alford last week. Do not let that guy get a chance to return the ball late, because bad things will happen if you're on the other side of the field. So whether it's field position as well, Mario Alford's a guy that they have to limit and find a way to take away, or limit is the best way to say when talking about some of these elite guys. You're never going to take them away fully. Limiting them is the best possible outcome in majority of those situations, especially the elite of the elite. So that's going to be pretty much our week number 4 preview, folks. Of course, business as usual. Jumped on for about 60 minutes, gave our initial thoughts. We're joined by a guest this week, Riders reporter Britton Gray joined us, which was awesome chat. Chatted about Saskatchewan Roughriders and the BC Lions matchup this Saturday, as well as some hot CFL topics that have been in the headlines this week. Not only this week, but to start the season as well. Of course, the injury report, and then the matchup itself, the BC Lions offense and the BC Lions defense versus the Riders. Of course, 3 keys to the game, and we put a bow on week number 4 preview. As I said at the start, I can't believe we are already a month down. 4 previews down, check. Time is absolutely flying, but we're absolutely having a blast on the channel, covering it every step of the way. BC Lions preview and post-game show. Of course, I am here, as you can see, solo once again, as Blake is MIA. But that is okay, because, as I said, I'm going to be here every step of the way throughout the rest of the season of, previews, making sure we're hammering them out every week, giving you guys something to consume the day before the BC Lions play, and then post-game show. Post-game show this week. Post-game show had a pretty good following and reception, and it appears that a few people would like to see it back. So we're going to go back to our BC Lions post-game recap live again this week. So game, I believe, is 4 o'clock Pacific kickoff, probably end around 7. You can probably expect our post-game recap around that 7:30, 8 o'clock. I like for the post-game media availabilities to come out, as well as kind of take a look at the stats, get a quick reset before we dive back into the game, and don't like to go initially live right after the game. So BC Lions post-game recap this week will be live once again. It'll kind of go on a week-to-week basis in terms of when we're going to be live and when we're going to be recording it and uploading it to the channel for you guys to consume. Nonetheless, that being said, guys, we are right in the thick of things of uploading content here on the channel, as well as this week I missed out, but the fellas over on the weekly show handled business as usual with Coach Shane and Blake. Of course, we made our picks. You guys can see those on our social media channels. Of course, you guys can find us on Twitter at _CF Fanatics, and on Instagram at Canadian Football Fanatics over there as well. When talking about our Instagram, guys, and a huge milestone is within reach, the light is at the end of the tunnel. We are nearing 3,000 followers on our Instagram, and it would be a huge accomplishment in just over a year's time of growing our brand, our product, our platform. And it's a huge thank you to you guys for following along, for motivating us to continuing to upload content and be at our best as 365, 24/7, uploading as much Canadian football fanatic content for you guys as possible. So head over to our Instagram if you guys aren't, and follow our account. It'd be greatly appreciated as we near 3,000 followers. That being said, guys, last reminder to subscribe. 3,000 darn followers on the Instagram. For all you guys that are over on Instagram, come on over to YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel. It'd be greatly appreciated, and it would help us out. It'd help us grow on YouTube that much more. When you guys subscribe, of course, press the notification bell is the best way to stay in touch with our YouTube channel as well. Hope you guys enjoy week 4 in the CFL, as game number 1 is finishing up pretty quickly here as I maybe try to look at the score with Winnipeg taking on the Edmonton Elks. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of week 4, and we will catch you guys on the week 4 BC Lions post-game report live show.